Okay, great. Thank you, Bishop. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we'll jump right back into it. Okay, so as you see, or as we talked about, the solution we in our revitalization efforts, what we found to work is there's lots to it, but we've boiled it down and put it into this acrostic revive, and within that there's a lot to talk about. So what I want to do in this session, well, you see the first is the RE, which stands for renewal, and what we believe to be true, and what we know to be true, is there is no revitalization without renewal. In other words, all the strategies and the principles and the plans and the programs and the things you can do that would lead to health and growth won't go anywhere if there's not real love for Jesus in people's hearts. But I'm going to skip over that today, only not because it's not of first importance, but because I'm going to talk about that some at the end in the last session tomorrow to kind of end with some of that. So I'm not ignoring that, just going to save it for later. But so I want to jump into the values and vision aspects of what it takes to revive. Remember, in the life cycle, we were talking about that, inclining churches are vision driven. They're focused on a vision and based on values of needing to be missional and reaching the lost and making disciples and things like that. So that's kind of what we're getting into. And if a church is in recline and decline, a big part of getting back to incline is recapturing that sense of vision and future oriented and having strong values or convictions around the need to be missional. So that's what we're going to get into here. I'm going to start with the importance of, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip that. I don't think I have time for that. And that was just kind of a promotional video anyway, but maybe tomorrow, if there's time, I'll share that. So just want to talk about first the core value of there's lots of values that we have in the church, and there are a lot of important values like being biblical, having a biblical worldview. That's essential value. Being Christ-centered, being liturgical, or sacramental, and so there's a lot of different values that we hold, which are important. But for the sake of the revitalization efforts and for our time here, I want to focus on the primary and important value of a commitment to the Great Commission. So let's just talk about the Great Commission. You have to have, and you must have, a great commitment to the Great Commission if your church is going to revitalize. And this is just somewhere along the lines I heard this sorry. Speaking of hearing things, let me pause. I forgot to say this earlier. I'm going to share a lot of information with you. I already have, and more to come. And my experience of listening to people like me at conferences like this is that some of the information is just like a lot of information. Some of it's like, that's great. Some of it's like, I don't really relate to that. But in the midst of something like this, there's always this 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 or whatever, just what I would call kind of a Holy Spirit nugget. It's just like, oh, that's for me. So I just want to encourage you to be listening for those things. If some of it's like, nah, that doesn't really apply to me, or oh, I already knew that, but somewhere along the lines, I expect the Lord to say, this is what I wanted you to hear. So just be ready to kind of write those things down, because those are the kind of things that you can go back to later and say, okay, I need to work on that, or that's what I need to focus on moving forward. So anyway, so at some conference where I was listening to someone like me at some point, I heard somebody say, did you know that there's 5 versions of the Great Commission? And I thought, well, I never thought about that, because I always think the Great Commission, Matthew 28, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you, and I will be with you always to the very ends of the earth. So the Great Commission at Matthew 28, just go to had my framework on. But then, when they said, oh, there's 5 versions, so there's really 5 versions of the Great Commission. All 4 Gospels, and then at the beginning of the book of Acts, Jesus gives some version of this Great Commission. again, which is mostly we talk about Matthew 28. Mark has it in Mark 16:15. You can write these down or take a screenshot, a picture of it, and go look these up later. But Mark, of course, has a very short version of it, like go reach all people everywhere, something like that. Luke's is a little longer, and then Acts 1:8 kind of connects with the Luke, which isn't surprising. Where, of course, in Acts 1:8, it's and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And then in John 20:21, the Great Commission, the version is in John 20:21, which is when Jesus first met the disciples on the evening of the resurrection. He meets them in the locked room, and he says, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I send you." It's a different. It's not go and make disciples, but the same concepts there. It says, as the Father sent me, so I send you. And so just realizing that it's in all four Gospels in the beginning of Acts, and you all are teachers and have taught, and you know why things are repeated, and that's because they're important, and we need to get them. So just the fact that it's there so prominently is a reminder to us that this is really important. And I want to highlight for a second the importance of John 20:21 and why that one has become even more significant to me in my passion for being missional and fulfilling the Great Commission and revitalizing churches, even as much as Matthew 28. And that's because as I reflected on John 20:21, it's the first thing Jesus chooses to say to his disciples. So again, just think, well, let me ask you this. And again, I wish I could interact, but as a rhetorical question, do you think Jesus was smart? Think about that for a second. Was Jesus smart? Well, obviously he was smart, right? He's God. But we don't always think about that. But a reason I ask that is because it's clear that Jesus wasn't just winging it when he met the disciples in the upper room that evening of the resurrection. It wasn't like he rose from the dead and shows up in the locked room and thought, wonder what I should say to these guys. He obviously knew what he wanted to say, and he had something important to say. And the first thing he chose to say was, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I send you." The mission, the need to go and make disciples and baptize them and all the message to go and to be sent was the first thing he chose to say. Now I think that's significant. What else could he have said first? Just think about some of the things he could have said. He could have said, as we worshiped the Father together in spirit and in truth, so I want you to worship together. He didn't say that first. Now, by not saying that first, was he saying that worship's not important? Of course not. Worship's very important, but that's not what he chose to say first. He could have said, as we loved one another and fellowship together in community, so I want you to love one another and stay in community. Obviously, that's important. Before he was arrested, he talked about my command is this: love one another. It's obviously important, but it's not the first thing he chose to say after the resurrection. It's, as the Father sent me, so I send you. Mission, go. And then I could go on of all the different things. So why did he say first? Why did he say that first? Well, I'm sure there's lots of reasons, because it's very important. But one of the things that I'm convinced of is because Jesus is smart. He also, and he knows us well, that he knows that our in our, whether it's our sin nature or just whatever it is about us, we are going to default to not doing mission. In other words, we're gonna, and you think about all the things the church does and that are important, that we're called to do. We're going to tend to focus on those things that benefit us more directly and are less hard, like worship. We love worship, and we love all things about the way we worship, and so we put a lot of attention to that. And we even know, as good Anglicans, the worship's not about us; it's about God. But we still benefit from it, right? And so we love worship, and we love fellowship. We love being loved by others and being in community. Sometimes that's hard, but you know what I mean? We benefit from that. Service, even serving others in the church and being on the altar guild or being on all the different ways we serve in the church. It feels good to give and to serve and to be used by God. Anyway, you see where I'm going with this. So we'll tend to do all of those things and then talk about the mission and never get around to it often. Because we don't have it as the first priority, as the main thing, as Bishop Sutton said earlier. And as I think Jason said as well. So I think Jesus, knowing this, he said, the first thing was, as the Father sent me, so I send you. Do the mission. And if we put that first, and we're about being missional and going out and reaching the lost and bringing them in, then we're still we're gonna do the mission, and we'll still do worship. We're not gonna stop doing worship and fellowship and discipleship and all the other things. So I just put that out there to kind of help you realize this has got to be first. And before I go on to this commitment versus good idea, I said, oh, these guys know this already. I'm going to tell them something they already know, because in your own language, on your own website, in the own REC 100 vision, is that compulsion and conviction that Jason referred to, Canon Jason referred to just a little earlier. So I won't reread these now, but well, a little bit that our conviction, that the mission should be at the center of everything we do. Every Reformed Episcopalian should be a missionary. Each parish should be a mission station. So that's all I'm saying here in this point, is what that statement and these statements say, is that mission has got to be at the center. It's the foremost, because if it is, then we'll do that and the other thing, which brings me to this commitment versus good idea concept. I think one of the things in my experience, and I've been doing this a long time, and I've talked to a lot of Anglicans across the country, across the North America, and here's one of the things I've come to the conclusion is that for many Anglicans, evangelism and mission and all of the going out and all of those things is in the good idea category versus a commitment category. So think about this. So you think about, like, if there's a domain, like a domain of good idea over here, and then over here there's, if you can see me, a domain of commitment. So two circles, one area is commitment, one area is good idea. And think about this in your own life. If something is in the category or the domain of good idea for you, you may or may not do it. It's a good idea. You're for it. You're not against it, but you may or may not do it. If it's in the domain of a commitment for you, then you're going to do it no matter what. And there's lots of examples of that. I mean, think about, like, as church leaders, there's people in your church who going to church on Sunday morning is in the domain of good idea. Like, they're for it. It's a good idea. They're with you. They're not against your church. They're members. But it's a good idea. They're not absolutely committed to being there every Sunday. So all they need is a good rainstorm, or it's a little cold, or I'm sure different parts of the country are different for you. But in Jacksonville, Florida, if the Florida Gators had a Saturday night game, then there's a good chance there's some folks that just aren't going to come Sunday morning because they stayed up too late. Or if the Jaguars have a 1 o'clock home game, then you're going to, I'll be there next. So it's not, they're for it, but it's just a good idea. They're not committed. Committed people are going to show up no matter what. Even if you stayed up too late watching the Gator game, you're going to get up and go to church in the morning because you're committed to it. Or you're going to come to the early service and go to the Jaguar game later, or whatever it is. It's raining, you're going to drive there. If it's cold, you get the point. So good idea versus commitment. And if evangelism and mission is just in the domain of good idea for you or for your church, you're for it, you'll have committee meetings on it, you'll have some talk about it. But because it's hard and it's uncomfortable, and we often feel unequipped and all those things, we're scared, we end up not doing it. But if it's in the domain of commitment, we're going to do it no matter what. We're not going to let anything stop us from doing it. Just another example. I'll see the clock. Yeah, I have time for this. So I was thinking about this earlier. My older brother, who earlier in his life was a drug addict and alcoholic, and he's also a juvenile diabetic. But he got it in his head that he wanted from Florida to go to California. And he was committed to going to California. Now, the reality is he had no money. He's a drug addict. He didn't have insulin or food or all the things a diabetic would need, but he was committed to going. So he decided to hitchhike his way to California. Now, again, there's plenty of really good reasons not to do that, but he was committed, so he went. Thankfully, the last person who picked him up somewhere in, I don't know, Arizona or somewhere, drove him into California. Turns out that guy was a felon. They get arrested. My brother gets put in jail, and then he gets the food and insulin he needed, and he was okay. And now, by the way, he's saved and teaching elementary school at a Christian school, teaching Bible. But point is that's a great example of commitment. I'm going to do it. There's lots of good excuses. That's the kind of commitment that we need. We're going to do it no matter what, regardless of how hard it might be. Evangelism. So is evangelism and is mission and is the going out to reach those who don't yet know Jesus, is that in the area of commitment for you, or is it just a good idea? And if you want your church to revitalize, you as a leader and the people in the congregation need to move it into the commitment category. One of the reasons why it's kind of always been in the commitment category for me, since I told you about how I became, got saved and, committed my life to Christ and coming into full-time ordained ministry and all that, because it was very clear to me when I finally came to know Jesus and entered that relationship, I was very aware of the fact that I was going to go to hell. That before I prayed that prayer, I was going to hell, and I didn't know it. And I was like, how come nobody told me that? I was in church every Sunday. I led youth retreats and happening retreats. If any of you heard of those, I worked 6 teams. I was a rector. I mean, I did everything, and nobody ever told me that. I heard it anyway, that there was even this thing called hell, or I was going there. And I was like, that's just not right. And I thought, how many other people are going to go to hell if they don't believe in Jesus? So I'm not like a big preacher on hell. I'm not talk about all the time, but for me, that's a major motivator for like, people need to know Jesus. It's not okay for people to not know him. If I really love people, I need to do whatever it takes to see even one more person know him as Savior so that they spend eternity with him and not go to hell. And so I just think that, and I think as Anglicans, we've kind of lost that. We've kind of swept the doctrine, the teaching on hell under the rug a little bit. And again, I'm not saying we should go out and preach on hell every week, but I think what's happened is that we, as Anglicans, we're all aware of those Baptists and those fundamentalists or whoever, those people who, hell and damnation preaching, and that we're not about that. And so in reaction to not being like that, we kind of swung over here too far, like we hardly ever talk about it. And I just think losing that sense of like, oh my gosh, this is really desperately important for people. Maybe we've lost a little bit of the passion we need, or the commitment we need. And so there's oftentimes in my personal evangelism, or as leading the church, when I was a rector being missional, there's lots of times where my comfort level was more like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to push the congregation to do this uncomfortable thing for them. But the fact that, here's how it played out in my mind, and what I'm suggesting was helpful for you for this to be a commitment, is people's need to not go to hell is greater than my need for comfort. People's need to not go to hell, or to be positive, to be saved, to have a relationship with Jesus now, for their life to be transformed by him, to have eternal life, to go to heaven when they die. Their need for that, for being in the kingdom, is greater than my need to be comfortable, or not have hard conversations, or not to challenge people to do this, or not to make changes that are going to be necessary to see people, see our church become missional. So, okay, I'm probably going on a little longer than I need. It isn't necessarily a practical strategy here, but it's absolutely essential if you want your church to revitalize. Being missional and this need to do evangelism and to go out and not just hope people show up has got to be a commitment and not just a good idea. All right. I wish I could see your I can see a few faces here a little bit, but I can't see, as a speaker, I can't see how you're reacting, but I'm just going to move on and keep pressing on. So now I want to talk about move on from values, the value of having a great commitment to the Great Commission, to the idea of having a clear vision. So clear vision. So let's talk about that a little bit. So here's the key question that churches need to have when it comes to vision, in the missional culture that we're now in. Remember the different, we're not in Christendom anymore. We can't just hope people show up with, better greeter gifts and things. We need to have a missional culture. So I think one of the key questions that we want to ask is this to revitalize. How does God want to express himself through this church in this community, the outside community around you at this time? Okay, there's a lot in there. Let's think about this for a little. Let's unpack this. And by the way, this is in essence, the same question that in Bishop Sutton's address, he referred to as the fundamental question each church needs to ask is who are we called to reach, or what is our specific mission or ministry out in the community? Same idea. How does God, so it's not our vision, what I want, it's what does God want? Remember, the local church is the hope of the world. So your local church, God wants to use your local church to impact your little territory, whatever that is, for his kingdom. And other churches have their part, but your church has your part. So what does God want? How does God want to use your church? What does God want to do through your church to establish his kingdom? Again, through this church, again, not someone else's problem, but what is our local church called to do by God and who specifically, this is a big question, I'll repeat it later, who specifically are the unchurched people around us that God's calling our church to focus on reaching? You can't reach everybody. Around your church, there's all sorts of people who don't know Jesus, and you're probably not going to reach all of them, but you can reach some of them. And so you want to narrow it down. Who are the specific people that God's calling us to reach? And again, in this particular community, and every community is different. I mean, that's part of the challenge to this or the opportunities too, is that, there's not a one size fits all program or something that, if your church just does this program, it'll work, because what works in one part of the country might not work in another part of the country or North America. In Canada, it's fundamentally different right now than even in America. And being in Florida is different from being in Colorado or whatever it is. So how you got to understand your community and how does God want to use your church in your specific community and what specific people. And at this time, is important. I often like to, when I'm working with a local church, I like to ask the question of this, like, what year is it? And I'll wait, and everyone will say, well, it's 2021. I'll say, yeah. And what year will it be next year? 2022. Exactly. It's not 2010, or it's not 2003, or it's not 1974. It's never going to be those again. It's not like, well, we used to do this and that worked. Well, it's 2021 and next year is 2022. And then, so we've got to think about what does God want to do now? Again, not changing being Anglican, but how does he want to use our Anglican church now and moving forward? Okay, you're probably getting the idea. I'm probably beating it a little too much to death. Let me give you an example. So what I'm talking about, when I moved to Jacksonville after living in Texas, I came out to be a rector of this church. Church has been plateaued for years, and over a decade of plateau. And older, not a lot of no young families really. They hired me, a 31-year-old with 3 kids, to try to bring in young families, because that's what churches do, right? So the children's ministry at the time was my 3 kids and then 1 grandchild that some grandma would bring occasionally, their grandchild. But so you get the picture. It's a very common scenario in our province. So came into that, and so but with the idea we need to be missional. Okay, I don't want to backstory. I first came trying to be attractional. I was like, hey, we'll just do what we did in Midland. That worked. It worked really well. So I'll just do this here. So after about a year of just really working on trying to be attractional and putting greeter systems in place and tweaking improving on the worship services and things and just making things better, whatever, I was like, okay, well, people should start showing up more. And no one was showing up. So what worked in Midland, Texas wasn't working where I was. So I thought, okay, well, this is not working. Well, let's try something else. Or what do we need to do? So I started going out and actually getting to know the people, the community around our church. And the long story short, because this took, it took a while to figure it out. We did some demographic study, and the area of town that I was in was a lower income part of Jacksonville, as opposed to Midland, Texas, where we were, which is not lower income. Even when oil was like $13 a barrel, and everyone was complaining, it was still doing okay compared to the west side of Jacksonville where I was. It was a completely different culture. So as I'm getting to know the people, the common story that I heard people was, well, I don't have a job because I don't have a car, and I can't get I can't get to work, but I can't get a car until I pay off the $800 of fines that I have on my license from DUIs or whatever it was. And so I'm just stuck, and I'm gonna just, drink and do drugs and live off the government. And so again, no judgment in that comment. I'm just saying this was like, there was people who were just stuck in a cycle of what I'd consider hopelessness. They just thought there's no way out, nothing's gonna change. So I'm like, well, okay, well, these are the people that God's put around us to reach. I have no idea how to reach those. I come, Midland, it was middle to upper class kind of community, and Alpha worked and other things. And so, okay, well, I don't know what to do here. And they're not showing up, and I invite them, but they don't come. Well, as I continue to investigate and continue to talk to people and continue to listen, here's what I continually heard is people say, oh, well, I know God. I believe in God. I believe that, I've heard the gospel and all that stuff about Jesus. They went to VBS at some point or whatever. But they all thought that God was mad at them and wanted to punish them for all their sinfulness. They knew their life was a mess. They were doing all these bad things, and they just assumed God wanted to smite them and was mad at them. So the last place they would go for help to get their life transformed is to church. So I thought, okay, well, it doesn't matter how attractive we are. I finally clicked. It took me a while, a little thick, but the light bulb went on. Oh, it doesn't matter how attractive we are, how good my preaching is, how great our worship is, how great our liturgy is, and on. We got parking signs. We got it all. Everything's great. They're not going to show up because they're just not going to come to church. And so I thought, okay, well, we got to change strategy. So from that, how does God want us? He wanted us to fulfill the mission. He wants us to reach the lost. In this area of town that used to be, the economy just changed around the church over the years. So what do we do? So that's for us. We settled on working on recovery ministry. We thought, well, if we can offer a recovery, and we chose to use Celebrate Recovery, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. But just because I heard about it, let's try that. But Celebrate Recovery, if we can connect with these people where they are and where their need is in terms of their addiction need, and then build relationship with them, then maybe we can introduce them to Jesus, and then maybe get them into the church and make them disciples. So we said, let's try that. And again, it was several years of trial and error. We finally said, let's try this, and we did. And that was the thing that really turned our church around. Once we figured that out, this church and this community at this time, what has he got us to do? And we started the recovery ministry, and almost immediately we had unchurched people coming through the doors weekly, on a Friday night for Celebrate Recovery. And watch the clock here, because I could tell stories all day about this, but I won't. But I mean, almost weekly, someone would walk in the doors for the first time on a Friday night. They'd look up at the ceiling and they look down and say, well, the roof didn't fall in on me, because that was the belief system. God's mad at me. He's going to smite me if I go to church. So we always, no, we're glad you're here. Come on in. You're welcome. No matter what they look like, smell like, anything, just come on in. Some point that night, a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, here's how the conversation would, they say, well, what kind of church is this anyway? Because it wasn't what we expected. We expected to be judged, and we expected to be looked down upon, all those things that they had in their mind about how Christians are. And so what kind of church is this anyway? And we say, well, it's Anglican. And they say, what's Anglican? Every time, what's Anglican? And so don't worry about it. So and I won't go. So we'd eventually say, well, just come check it out. Come to church. And they came, and they, many of them became Christians. Many people joined the church, became members, got into our discipleship processes, and became active, full, serving members and who brought other people because they were so fired up for Jesus, they were bringing other people. They kept saying the common thing that people would say, bringing in their unchurched friends was, you got to check it out. This place is different. You got to check it out. This place is different. And I really appreciated Bishop Sutton's address earlier. And none of that was there ever any compromise in the biblical worldview or truth. You know, they were perfectly happy to believe what we believe because we loved them. They were made to feel like they belong. And their life was being transformed. So, and they could have cared less what Anglican is well either, to be honest with you, because they just were like, this is a great church. Why do you do this? And why do you do that? Or why do you stand up? Or why do you say that? And we tell them, but they loved it just because of what I just said. So that was just an example of what we did, but every church has got to be different because what worked for us in the west side of Jacksonville, even in my city in Jacksonville, 5 miles down the street from my church is the river. And all the community, the culture, just 5 miles down the street along the river is a fundamentally different culture than where my church was. Okay, so even if I was just 5 miles down the street, closer to the river in Jacksonville, and that's where I was, there our church was, we would have probably come up with a different strategy. So again, I'm going to keep going for time's sake, but I just I hope you get the idea. It's got to be localized and specific. Let's pray. So that's the key question. The rest of the time here is I just want to kind of fairly quickly go through some other ideas about vision and how vision matters or why vision matters and how to apply vision in your church to help get it back to a place of incline. So other questions to ask is what is is our vision clear? Is it clear? Do people in our church understand it? I can't tell you how many times I've been in a church and I say, hey, what is your guys' vision statement? And just blank stares, crickets chirping, right? And nobody knows it. If I wait long enough, somebody will get their phone out and go under the table and look up the church's website, find the vision statement and tell me what it is. But most people, they don't know if you ask. So it's got to be clear for the people to know what it is and say, hey, this is what our church is about. Again, at my church, over it kind of changed here and there over the years, but what we landed on was what kind of really became the focus was we're a church where lives are changed for good. So we're about seeing lives changed for good. Good for good meaning for good now, their life will be transformed in Jesus, but for good permanently. So at any rate, but so everyone knew it. If I asked anybody in our church anytime, what are we about here? What's our church all about? Well, our lives are changed for good. And then how we applied that was, different strategies and goals and programs and things. But so is it clear? Can people know it? If they articulate it and share it with someone else, you want it to be clear and doable. And who are the specific, and again, this is the same question I asked earlier. I won't go long here on that, but who are the specific unchurched people in your community that you are trying to reach? What are they like? What are their needs? So it's got to be clear and doable. The other thing to think about when you think about vision, by the way, most of your churches probably already have a vision statement because 20 years ago, someone like me came along and said, hey, you should have a vision statement, and vestries hammered something out. And so often I don't try to tell churches, oh, you need to redo your vision statement because that's just drudgery, most of the time in the wordsmithing and, it's just can be painful. I mean, if you don't have a vision statement, you need one. But if you have one, it's better to just take what you have and work it and massage it and make it better oftentimes. But every church is different. But the most important thing is having it and knowing what it is and then acting upon it and letting that drive what you do as a church. Okay, is it challenging? Does it move our people? Does it move our people to action? So it can't be too big in the sense of it's like so big it's not specific and clear. Going back to the last point, like it's like, oh, we're called to reach, our city for Jacksonville, our city for Jesus, or we're called to reach the lost. Well, that's too broad because there's just too many lost people. So you want to be, it's got to be not too broad, too big. It's got to be narrowed down, specific. And clear, but it also needs to be big enough where it's challenging. So it's big enough where it's going to inspire you to go like, man, we got to do this. And there's the whole, can the people who are not challenged with the final product, there's no vision. And the BHAG idea there, that's an old, thing that's been around for years, but when I was coming up, people used to talk about BHAG, which is big, hairy, audacious goals. What is your big, hairy, audacious goals? And but the concept there is it's got to be a big enough vision where you need God in it. If it's so small that you can do it without God's help, it's probably not a God-driven kingdom of God vision. So it's gotta be challenging and something that you really need. Okay, God, we need you to do this through us. So it's good vision demands a lot of time, prayer, and energy. And keep going. So is it challenging? Is it future oriented? Remember in the incline, in the life cycle, future oriented, and we're going somewhere. That's so crucial to an inclining or thriving church, a revitalized church. So does it present a picture of the ministry future? Where are we going? Vision is always cast in terms of the future. Visionaries are always thinking about the future. We're living in the present because you're dealing with reality now, but you're thinking about where are we going? Visionary leaders will be thinking about, when a church is future oriented and thinking about the vision, you'll have okay, here's where we're going over the next several years. This year, our focus is going to be this. Next year, our focus is going to be that. And then even within, okay, next year, our focus is this. And so we're going to have, and during Lent, we're going to do this, during the Easter season, this, over the summer, in the fall, here's kind of how we're going to be over this next year, really driving this vision in this particular area further in the life of our church. And so you're just thinking ahead all the time. How are you using the present as a platform to launch the ministry into the future? Okay, so you're always like, I don't know, there's lots of examples, but always using the present to say, okay, here's where we're going next. Here's where we're going next. And this is huge. Don't be constrained by the past. Don't be constrained by the past. I've so many times in my own ministry, and I've heard from so many other people where a priest will say, oh, well, yeah, I wanted to do this, or we talked about doing that. And as soon as I brought it up, someone will say, well, we did that, back in 1995 and it didn't work. Or, well, we tried that before. Well, okay, well, it's now. So let's try it again, or let's tweak it and try it. What did we learn for what didn't work, and try it again. So don't be constrained by the past. It's 2020, 2021, and next year will be 2022. We got to be moving forward. Learn from what didn't work and keep going. Just a great scripture here, which Paul said in Philippians 3:13 and 14. One thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal. And revitalization, you need to keep pressing on towards the goal. In tomorrow's second session, we're going to talk a lot about how to press on and how to keep going when it gets hard. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this session. And I just want to take a minute or two to talk about kind of where are we going from here and what's next. Well, first thing, the last bullet point there, I'll start with that, which is come back tomorrow for more. Okay, so I know in afternoon sessions or on Zoom, or it's going to be long. I've had two long full days of looking at a computer screen. So I know sticking around tomorrow afternoon for the second two sessions might seem grueling, but I encourage you to stick around to see what the Lord would say to you about revitalization. So there's more to come to that. But I also, I just want to briefly talk about the revive process. And so what we are offering the province in our revitalization ministries is called a revive process, which involves, so your church might want to do a revive, and there's other things you can do in your diocese, which hold that thought for a second, but just the revive process and how we can help a specific church do what we're talking about here more specifically and help you figure out the specific mission, the specific vision, and those kind of things, is that we have a church health assessment that we can offer your church to take and give you a general sense of where things are. Kind of like taking the doctor and you take the vital signs. You got to get a kind of a diagnostic baseline of where are we. So we have an assessment, and then I would come in and do a weekend with your congregation, providing seminar, which all the stuff that I'm sharing here would be included in there and much more. So you get your whole congregation hearing all of this together and going, okay, we can do this, and sort of getting aligned around these ideas. And then it's followed with 6 months of coaching, individual coaching, where I or one of our coaches would work with you to implement the next steps and to keep things going. So it's not just a nice weekend, that was great, and nothing happens. So the coaching kind of helps you implement those next steps for your specific congregation. So that's the Revive process. And so some of your individual congregations might say, hey, we want to do that in my church. But there's also, we could also do things in the diocesan region. If there's 3 or 4 or 5 churches in a geographic area, we come in and do that whole process for a region of churches. Here's what I'm going to say next, and I'm almost done, is that I'm working with Bishop Sutton and Canon Jason and the Canon Missioners and some other REC 100 leaders to talk about how to follow up with this general council, so that this isn't just, oh, that was nice, and hopefully you think, well, Mark was good, and that was nice to hear him and everything, and he told some fun stories. But then nothing ever comes of it. That wouldn't be beneficial to anybody concerned. So we've been working. So what we're going to do is, after General Council, offer some Revive cohorts. And so your Canon missioners and others are going to create groups. If you want to be a part of them, you could self-select in to say, I want to be a part of one of these Revive cohorts, and then you could jump into that. And kind of keep talking about these things, and how do we apply these things that we're talking about here and tomorrow in your church. So just stay tuned for that to come, and how to sign up for those if you're interested. I just want you to know this isn't the end. This isn't like, oh, that was nice and nothing's going to happen. We're going to continue to engage in this stuff to see the REC 100 vision come to fulfillment. And so that's the third bullet point there, is this diocesan strategy where there's conversation about how can we help dioceses and help regions of churches really apply these principles, so that you're not just trying to do this all alone. So with that said, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Bishop Sutton or Canon Jason or whomever to wrap us up. And I'm looking at it. I think I'm landing the plane 3 minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm gonna be pleased with that.